Hey there. Welcome to Lead Fearlessly, Strategies of Confident Women Leaders, the podcast that will empower you to unleash your inner strength and embrace leadership with confidence. I'm your host, Katie Winchenbach, and I'm excited to have you join us as we dive into the experiences of extraordinary women who've shattered glass ceilings and redefined success on their own terms. Get ready to be motivated, challenged, and equipped with the tools and strategies to lead fearlessly in your own life and career. I'm thrilled to welcome our guest today, Diane Darling. Diane is a speaker, instructor, author, and leadership coach who specializes in professional networking. I've had the pleasure of hearing Diane speak several times, and she just always provides such incredible networking tips. So welcome, Diane. I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Katie.
To kick it off, I will have you briefly introduce yourself in a little more detail to our audience and kind of describe your journey to where you are now.
So a quick introduction is I work with really smart people who may not be blessed with people skills. Accountants, attorneys, scientists, engineers, doctors, that population tends to fit into that bucket, if you will. And they're really smart, very talented people, but this is not their lane. And so I love working with them because I can help them figure out how to best do that.
Awesome. And I think to set the stage, tell us a little bit about why building a professional network is so important for career development.
At the end of the day, it's our relationships that help us succeed. So we could be the best attorney, we could be the best doctor, but if people don't like us, if for some reason we rub them the wrong way, or let's say, for example, they don't even know who we are, is a big part of the problem. So the reason why people want to network is somebody actually knows who you are. And that's going to get you in the operating room on the team when you're a junior surgeon. That's going to get you, invited to the pitch when you're a young associate. And you get a chance to see how the senior leaders pitch a piece of business. So it's your ability to be known and be respected and liked is something I think of that is really important.
I really liked that when you started your answer, you said it's about relationships, because I think for a lot of folks, networking is hard, and they think it's really all about selling themselves. And that's really not what you teach.
You're exactly true. And, networking, when somebody in the beginning, when somebody said, Diane, you're a good networker, could you do a workshop about it? I was actually really kind of insulted. I thought, I don't want to be a good networker. That's creepy. That's weird. That's disrespectful. I didn't. And I said, what do you see in me that I do that you like? And they said, you help people. I'm like, well, doesn't everybody? And they said, no. So, and if I could change the word, Katie, I would change the word. But, after your Ms. JD conferences and there's a chance to hang out, people say on the brochure and, it's time for networking. What does that actually mean? And so people say, there's time for this stuff, but people actually don't know, A, what it is, or B, how to do it. So I really try and help people understand. If I could think of a different word, I would, but no one says, let's go to the relationship building cocktail hour. It's just not a phrase that anybody uses. Let's go to the networking time. So, my definition of networking is two aspects. One, it's building relationships before you need them. And two, networking is the transference of trust. And the way I met Ms. JD was an attorney said to, your predecessor, I really think you should have Diane be a speaker because she's been very helpful to our law firm. That's the transference of trust.
Another thing that you said that stood out to me in an area where I think a lot of people falter is that you're building the relationship before you need it. I think part of the issue with the concept of networking is that you don't always want to just reach out to someone when you need a job. And I'm interested from your perspective, how do you kind of build that relationship with folks and keep in contact and build the relationship when you aren't looking for something?
So I have something, I'm trying to learn how to do this using the bookmarks actually on my browser. And I was just having someone show me how they use their bookmarks. But part of it is that if I'm reading an article and it makes me think of you, I'm going to bookmark it and I'm going to send to Katie. If I see a story on the news, I'll go find the link and I'll send it to you. I'm not asking for anything at the moment, but I'm putting into your bank account net deposits. I'm putting in little deposits, and the more deposits I put in, then all of a sudden I can say, hey, Katie, I see you know somebody at XYZ law firm. Would you be willing to make an introduction? The best way to do it is to just drop little information to them every so often, thinking about you when I saw this happen. You know, I talked to so-and-so, which made me think of you.
Thinking about networking in that more traditional context that you mentioned of we've got a networking time where everybody's in a room, there's cocktails, there's appetizers. What are some tips you have for folks to make the most out of a time like that?
So I'm going to just assume it's mandatory you're going, because I have a completely different exercise called the weather report, which is whether or not you choose to go. But for practical purposes, let's say you're a young associate or you're even the managing partner. You got to go. Whether you like this or hate this, or it's your favorite thing to do, or you'd rather, floss, it means you got to go. So let's just go with that. So one of the first things that I tell people to do is get there early. Ideally, get there early. And I like to get there before anybody else is in the room, because then you come into my space. I don't have to go into your space, and just physically and psychologically, that's a safer place to be. Another thing I'll share with you is that one thing that you can do is when you get there early, glance at the name tags, see who might be coming that you might know. So you have at least one or two friendly faces. And then candidly, I go to the bar. I don't go there to drink. I go there to meet the bartender, because bartenders are rarely bartenders professionally. It's a side hustle. And I have met amazing people who are bartenders, and they just do it on the side. It's not their full-time gig. They're interesting people. They often, are at some of these different soirees where they get to meet different people. And I often will just simply say, so when you're not bartending, what else do you do with your life? At this time, other people are kind of beginning to come in. And then I will go to one person who's all by themselves. And I start with 2 words, and those 2 words are, tell me your connection to the blank event. Tell me your connection to the bar association. Tell me your connection to the company. We work at the same company. What department are you in? Tell me what department you're in. So that opens up a conversation. Yeah.
I like that too focuses on the other person. I hear a lot of times advice from folks with networking that's make sure you have your elevator pitch ready. And I think for a lot of people, the thought of just walking into a room and walking up to someone and starting with an elevator pitch feels a little aggressive or a little bit sleazy. So I like that with your approach, you're really just taking time to get to know the other person.
Absolutely. And the whole idea is you want to be prepared with your elevator pitch, but you don't start with that. put this in social circumstances. Imagine you go to a bar and you're hanging out with some friends from work and you see somebody who, you know, seems to be having fun and you're interested in maybe getting to say hello to them. You know, you have a little bit of a glance, you have a smile, you have a wave, you know, then comes the opportunity where someone says, hi, you know, nice to see you. You know, I'm out with some buddies from work, or, you know, it's a holiday gathering or whatever it is you want to say. It's unlikely you walk up to that person and say, so how about we leave here and go to the justice of the peace? 2 kids or 3, I need to know right now. Mom's moving in if she gets sick. I'm assuming you're good with that. You know, people sometimes, I mean, you laugh, but that's how people do it. I was saying earlier today that there was one time I was at an event and this man walked up to me and he said, do you have receivables? And I'm like, do I have what? And he said, receivables. Does anybody owe you money? And I'm like, no, right now I'm good. Okay, never mind. And walks away. And then he goes up to somebody else. Do you have receivables? And I'm like, sweetheart, slow down, you know? And how's this working for you? It wasn't. I mean, you know, is anybody going to admit in a room you've got a lot of receivables? Probably not.
Yeah. And he's missing out on actually making a connection with you where if you did need his services down the road, you would reach out. Because for me, if someone was that kind of forward, I don't even know if I would trust them to do the job.
No, you wouldn't. I mean, it would just feel creepy and awkward. And so part of it is, this is why I like to go to the person who's all by themselves. And if they're on their phone, which often they are, I will, you know, kind of half-heartedly say, so, you know, what's your favorite app? You know, I'm always intrigued about what people's favorite apps are. And, you know, they'll often kind of awkwardly say, you know, it's whatever else it is that they use. And then I'll say, you know, tell me your connection. You know, part of it is that we are so nervous. And so one thing I will also tell people to do, if you feel nervous walking into these rooms, beforehand, go into the restroom and do squats or do jumping jacks or do something to rev your heart up. So when you walk into the room, your heart is already accelerated, because then it will just naturally kind of calm down. But you're starting out at a pace of anxiety, if you will, at a pace of, you know, your heart is beating, it's kind of racing. And so as you begin to walk around, you know, you have a seltzer or something like that. And I tell people, you know, I'm not against alcohol. I'm just saying be smart about it.
Well, there's nothing worse than being the person at the networking event that's stumbling drunk. That's definitely not the vibe that you want to give off.
Well, that's true. No, we definitely don't want to talk about, we definitely don't want to see that, you know. And there have been 2 times where I've gone to the person who's head of the event and I have said, one time it was before Uber and another time it was after Uber. And I said, you need to get this person home. And in both situations, I felt incredibly awkward. I felt like a little tattletale. And both people said, thank you so much.
Once you've started to do this, you're showing up to events, you know, maybe you're forced to, maybe you're starting to enjoy it. You're keeping in touch with these folks and you really feel like you're building a good relationship. How do you know when it's appropriate to leverage those relationships and kind of what you can ask of each person in your network?
So one thing I'll say is I'm a little bit of a counterintuitive or contrarian in this. I would say go to people who you're 99% sure are going to say no, they don't want to help you. Because you get to practice your pitch. You get to practice your ask. So let's say it's time, you feel like it's time for you to get a bigger assignment at a firm. And you want to go to somebody who's involved with that decision process. Go to somebody who is either not involved with the decision process, or go to somebody with whom you can practice it and say it out loud. So in order for me to get over my fear of public speaking, I took acting classes and stand-up comedy. And part of the reason I did this is that because my neck would break out in red blotches when I was first starting to speak. And it was so distracting one time somebody actually stopped me and said, I think you've eaten something you're allergic to. And I thought, okay, if it's that distracting and they're sitting not far away from me, but let's say they're in the first or second row, so it's not like they're really right next to me the way you would be if you're standing next to somebody, and it's visible from there, I've got to fix this. So the first thing I did was I went out and actually bought red turtlenecks, because I thought if it's going to break out, it'll break out and it's going to be a little bit of a glow, but the blotches won't show so much with the red turtlenecks. And so then I thought, what can I do to get over my fear and my anxiety? And, and basically I needed to learn how to perform. I needed to learn how to public speak. And so I thought one of the brilliant ways to do it is acting. And so I took an 8-week acting class here in Boston. And it was terrific because it gave me the chance to practice. And I can't tell you how many times I wanted to quit. But because I'm from Boston, there were probably over half the class were doing it in a different language. We were doing it in English, but English was not their native language. And I would be miserable, and I would think about, Diane, would you do this in Chinese if you were over there for a while? Would you do this in French? Would you do this in Portuguese? I would have no tolerance for that whatsoever. And they were sticking with it, and their commitment to it helped kind of frankly intimidate me to finishing the class. Then you realize what you need to do is have really good lines and really good pacing and really good voice control. You want to know when to speed it up and talk a little bit faster. And when you want to make it a little bit slower and thoughtful. I've learned I have to say my name slowly. If I say, hey, I'm Diane Darling, I get Darlene, nice to meet you. If I say, I'm your speaker today, with a pause, and my name is Diane Darling, I'll get people to remember me as Diane.
For people who don't feel super comfortable with speaking, maybe they're introverted, and even just talking to, one other person is really intimidating. Are there some strategies you learned in your class that are helpful for folks to practice at home?
Yes. Part of it is the other person is really nervous too. Everybody's just trying to do the best they can to cover it up. So I start with that. Another thing I'll share with you, and I say this with jest, is that if you're feeling like you shouldn't walk up to anybody who's a stranger because, you don't want to, that just feels awkward to you, I jokingly say that means you had parents who loved you because they told you don't talk to strangers when you went out as a kid. I'm not saying that if your parents didn't say that, they didn't love you. But my point is that we have been told since we were little, we shouldn't talk to strangers because as a little one, you don't know the difference between a good stranger and a bad stranger. As an adult, you have a vibe. You have a sense. If you're in the room with only people from your company, it's probably pretty likely you're safe. No one's going to mug you. No one's going to hurt you. So walking up to somebody who you don't know at a company party means you're going to just meet somebody else at your company. If you go to a bar association event, you're going to meet somebody else who's a member of the bar. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's unlikely you're going to meet somebody who's going to say, I don't want to talk to you. Why would I want to talk to you? But we have this innate natural survival. And so part of it is if we have this set of lines, and when I say lines, I don't want it to sound like it's canned. But if we have this sense of poise, if we have a sense of purpose in what we're going to say, if we have a sense of authenticity, that I would really like to get to know this person who I'm talking to right now named Katie. And there's a sense of genuineness about that. People pick up on that. Whereas if I'm looking over your shoulder or I'm looking at my phone or I'm, just generally being rude, you pick that up as well. And Katie, I will say that I do think that we have an up and coming generation that my heart goes out to them. They are so addicted to their phones. They're so addicted to social media that is how they find their sense of value. Where people who are raised pre-technology, we didn't have that. Now, there's a lot of really wonderful things about technology. I love it. I use it all the time. I was on a Zoom yesterday and I was sharing my screen and asking a couple questions about how to log into a website. And she says, I'm just amazed at your ability to do technology and some of the things that you're just kind of zooming around and doing. Because for somebody of my age, I am quite proficient and I'm very curious about it. So it's something I spend time with. But I also had an incredible time of my life where there was no technology. I went to go see one of the final seasons. I was in California and I went to go see a taping of The Big Bang Theory. And they don't let any phones into the set. And so they tell you this ahead of time. They ask you to leave it in the car. If by chance you don't, they collect it for you. And so they were having the filming and then they would take a break and they would work on the scene and the coaches and the directors and all that kind of stuff would be there. And they would be trying to figure it out and then they would refilm it, and during that kind of downtime, the audience would kind of be chatting with each other for a little bit. And then at one point we had a pizza break. It was amazing how lively that conversation was because nobody had their phone. So people have been raised literally with a crutch. And I can tell you, having recently been on crutches, they can be painful. They serve a purpose, but at the same point, when you take it away, you don't want to fall over. And so it's important that people do learn. And I think sadly, this population has not necessarily learned how to have the art of a conversation without technology.
And as you mentioned, technology is important and it is, for better or for worse, kind of an integral part of how we interact nowadays. How important for someone who is starting out in their career, who is building their brand, who is wanting to become well-known and have a strong network, how important is it to have an online presence, be it a website, be it a LinkedIn, and how do you use that in your networking?
So the number one thing I would say is it's LinkedIn. If you can build your own website, but if you're working at a company, you should make it very clear why you have your own website if you're working at a company. I mean, if you have a side hustle, that's one thing, but I think a LinkedIn is kind of just de facto now. I mean, everybody should have a LinkedIn profile. There's just no doubt about it. And so I would use that to post every few days, at least once a week if possible. Give when I say give feedback, I'm going to say, let's say I go to a bar event and say, grab a picture of the event or of the speaker and say, I was so privileged to hear so-and-so speak, tag them at, and you could put grab their name, at the bar association and to put the name of the bar association, enjoyed insights about AI or, trademark or whatever else it is that you heard. Do that because then that will trigger or rattle, if you will, the LinkedIn algorithms to say, yes, this is an active user. There's 1 billion members, billion with a B, on LinkedIn. I joined it when it was brand new and my membership number is 16,418. So I was on there with a little village. But the downside of it having grown so big is that the engagement is not that active as, it would be if it was a smaller community. So, because when it was a smaller community, everybody knew each other. So I think it's very important for people to be on there and to be, relatively active, a post a week. These are some of the things that, you can outsource. You can hire somebody to be a manager for you for your LinkedIn page. But LinkedIn is where I would do that. You want to have a professional headshot. You don't want to look like it's at a wedding or in a backyard barbecue or, I have a collection of bad LinkedIn pictures. I've got one woman with a glass of wine. I got a guy with his dog. I'm like, if you're a veterinarian, that's okay. If you're a vintner, it's okay to have a glass of wine. But if you just, if you're not, then it makes you look like you're a party girl, not necessarily a professional.
And if we had to kind of sum up everything that we've talked about, and you had to say, for rising women leaders, if there is one thing that they need to be doing to be growing their network, what is that like one critical thing that everyone needs to be doing?
They probably need to follow up more. They need to, we have this feeling like, oh, I just need to go out and meet more people. That's fine, but be sure you take care of the relationships you currently have. So if you take care of those relationships, it looks more like you care. And there's an opportunity for you to build that stronger and let those people introduce you to their network and let those people introduce you to their network. And then it ripples like rock when you throw it in the water.
I really like that because I agree with you that that's often what we're forgetting about. We make these plans to go to networking events and think about the people that we want to meet, and forget not only to foster that relationship, but I like that you brought up those people know people as well. And if you're top of mind for them, they can recommend other people for you to meet or get you connected to different people. But that really only works if you have a strong relationship with them.
Yeah, that is absolutely for sure. And so part of it is building those relationships, making those connections, not feeling like you're overwhelming yourself, not feeling like you're overwhelming other people, being gracious. There's some people who, the speaker pops down and starts taking questions and answers. And the next thing you know, you feel like if you're standing in line, you're kind of standing behind this person like, what is this, a therapy session? It's, it should be just a few minutes that you take of that person's time so you can move on to the next, so the speakers can move on. So one piece of advice I would give your listeners is to, maybe go to an event that is outside of their industry, where they're feeling less anxious about making a really good impression, where they may not know anybody, and practice it. I have an analogy that you may have heard me before talk about how, when you learn how to drive a stick shift, you don't learn how to do this in a BMW or Maserati. You learn how to do this in an old beat up car. So find an event that is equivalent of an old beat up car that you really don't care if you grind the gears, and then move up the food chain. So when you want to work with the managing partner, you feel very comfortable and confident in going in there to talking to the managing partner.
And something we haven't touched on really, but has been in the background of everything that we've been discussing, is that this is a practice. Not many people are instantly networking superstars. I know it does come natural to some folks, but for a lot, this type of relationship building is a practice where you have to build that muscle over time before you really do feel comfortable at bigger events or can go into events and not feel nervous at all.
Well, or imagine you're Meryl Streep or Harrison Ford or whoever is, your person, to look up to. And imagine that you're going to win the Oscar for playing that role. Play it. Just pretend, almost just have an outer body experience. This is what acting helped me with, is I almost had an outer body experience where it wasn't Diane Darling who was networking. It was the character Diane Darling. And that character was confident. There's a wonderful scene of Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada where she can't remember somebody's name. And her assistant is trying to remember the name and can't remember the name. And Anne Hathaway comes and saves the moment. I want to imagine I'm Meryl Streep in this moment of I'm going into this room. Whether I'm wearing the right thing or the wrong thing, but I know exactly how I'm going to behave there. And I just play that role. It's just one aspect of who I am. It's not the same person who I am right now with my, ankle injured up on a pillow and I'm wearing my pajamas. So I think in some cases we take ourselves pretty seriously and we need to allow ourselves to be human. We need to allow ourselves to be flawed, and just have a bit of a smile and, curtain up and just play the role. Just play the role. I will tell you, introverts can be excellent networkers because they're really good listeners. And in many cases, they're really compelling because they listen more than they talk. In many cases, introverts are much better networkers than extroverts because extroverts need the energy. So introvert versus extrovert doesn't mean you like people or dislike people. It means you either are energized by people or not. And so if you're energized by people, you need the people energy. You need that juice. Whereas if you're an introvert and people might drain you a little bit, you don't need them so much, but it doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you're not good at having a thoughtful, really engaging conversation, because it means you're going to be listening. Now, I will say that at networking events, it's important to know you might get interrupted. And so you'd never want to be talking about anything confidential. You never want to be talking about somebody else who could be within earshot or even not. It's just not wise to be mentioning people's names.
So, Diane, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I appreciate everything you've shared with us. Is there anything that we haven't touched on related to networking that you think is really critical for rising women leaders?
I would say just practice it. Just go out and do it. Maybe for what rising women leaders, particularly for people who are, at their offices these days, is one, going to the office. Office friendships are very important. And so take advantage of this fact that not everybody else wants to be in the office, and go in the office as much as you possibly can. 2, I would say invite people to lunch while you're in the office. And if people want to say, hey, I'm going frugal these days, I'm bringing my lunch, but do you want to bring yours on Thursday? And we can hang out here in the cafeteria, and I just like to hear a little bit more about your story and how you joined the company. Eating at your desk is not a good idea. It makes it look like you can't manage time. It makes it look like, you're overworked, and that's not necessarily a very good message. But I think an opportunity, there was, in the middle of at one point when there was a break in the pandemic, and they said, people were going back to work, and they had an article about it, and I wanted to scream because it was only the men that were going back to work because they had wives at home who were making everything else happen. So I do know that going back to the office is a lot of work. I have this whole thing is it worthy enough to put on my shoes? If it's not worthy enough for me to put on my shoes, I'm not going. These days, particularly now that I'm injured, but even when I'm not, what gets me out of the house? Gets me away from my apartment, putting on shoes, putting on eyeliner, putting on a jacket. It's all a lot of work. So I know it's work, but I really encourage people, young women in particular, to do this, because as you can meet these friendships, these are people who are going to have your back when it's a bad day. Do you know the name of the receptionist? Do you know the name of the mail people? We don't necessarily get a lot of physical mail these days, but if you actually want to get someone's attention, put something in the mail. Spend 69 cents on a stamp. Not a lot of money. If it's less than $1 and people would spend thousands to go to networking events, put something in the mail.
That is a great tip. Well, Diane, thank you so much for joining us today. All of these tips were so incredibly helpful.
Been a pleasure.
I encourage all of you to connect with Diane. Her LinkedIn profile is linked in the show notes. And also check out her incredible networking books, which you can find on our free downloadable book list. Thanks for tuning in to Lead Fearlessly, Strategies of Confident Women Leaders. If you've been inspired by today's episode, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a friend who could use a confidence boost. Remember to subscribe so you won't miss out when we drop our next season. And if you found our conversations valuable, please leave us a 5-star review. Your support helps us continue to amplify the voices of incredible women leaders and inspire more fearless female trailblazers.